Hey everyone, this is Steve from GamersNexus.net, and today we're talking about CPUs. This is a CPU buyer's guide, similar to that video card buyer's guide I posted a couple days ago, back before Black Friday. And for this one, we're looking at CPUs ranging from about $70 up to $500+. And obviously there are much more expensive options if you have the budget for it, but that's sort of out of the scope of this video because the architecture changes so vastly at that point. So starting right away with the low-end CPUs, we generally recommend AMD's 860K at the budget price point, the sub $100 range. The 860K is a brand new Kaveri-based AMD CPU. It is similar to the A series APUs, except it has the IGP, the integrated graphics processor, disabled. So it's just the CPU, and that makes it cheaper. The 860K is a quad-core 3.7 gigahertz CPU, and it'll overclock pretty well if you've got a motherboard that'll do it, like an A88 board or something like that. It is an FM2 Plus socket, so it does use AMD's more modern socket, which we've stopped recommending AM3 Plus because, frankly, it's really sort of a mess at this point with all the aftermarket chips soldered to the different boards. FM2 Plus is fine though, and it works well. PCIe 3 is natively supported, USB 3 is natively supported, so it's a step in the right direction. The 860K is what you should buy if you're looking to spend about $90 on a processor, so this would be for system builds that are in the $500 or less price range, and that's basically you're on a really tight budget and you're probably throwing something like a 750 Ti or a 260X or 265, something like that in there for the video card. And it will play most games pretty well. It will run into issues with games like Battlefield 4 that are very thread intensive, and it will definitely run into issues with video production, professional editing technology, Photoshop, things like that. So you don't want this 860K for things like Photoshop and professional productions. Now, if you are either not a fan of AMD or you can't quite, you don't want the 860K for one reason or another, like it's higher TDP, which really it's not bad, but it's still higher than Intel, or you just don't have the extra $20 to spend. Intel's G3258, which is the easiest to remember name in the industry, is a low TDP solution, and it's a Pentium processor. It exists solely for the purpose of things like HTPCs, really ultra budget gaming computer builds, and it works very well. It'll overclock 30 to 50% pretty consistently. In my tests, you can definitely get it 30% overclocked, no problem. Ships stock at about 3.2 gigahertz, 2.1, 3.2, and it is a dual-core processor with no hyper-threading. So you do lose some cores there, and yes, Intel and AMD have different definitions of cores, but still the AMD solution does perform a bit better in games like Battlefield 4. It is $20 more, of course, and you might not want it because this will be better for home theater PCs that are less gaming intensive, and the games they play might be a little easier on the graphics and on the CPU side of things. And this is a $70 processor, so it's a bit cheaper, lower TDP, more efficient, but less powerful. Although it is less powerful, it will overclock well. So if you're willing to overclock, grab a Z-Series, Z-Class board and clock it up, and then you'll get much better performance, even in multi-threaded applications. Moving up to the mid-range, we have things like Intel's i5-4440 CPU, and this is sort of the $165 price range, so if you're buying a little over $100 but you can't quite afford a 4690K, for instance, then this is where you would be. The 4440 CPU runs stock at 3.1 gigahertz, and it is a quad-core solution, so it's significantly better than the G3258 that we just looked at. And it's still low TDP, it still has well architecture, so it will enable things like self-shading smoke and technologies like that, which are present in the grid racing game. And the 4440 is what you would buy if you have zero interest or very limited interest in overclocking, because it is a locked CPU. You won't be able to overclock it, or not much anyway. And it's a budget-friendly solution. It'll perform just fine for really almost every game out there, and it'll be fine in some limited production tasks. Photoshop, really, unless you're doing intensive stuff, and you know if you are, it's not going to be limited in things like that for most average users. The higher end users will want to look in the next price range though. As for an AMD solution at this price point, there is the A10 7850K, which you would really only buy if you wanted a high-end IGP. It uses R7 graphics integrated, and that is very good for an HCPC where you don't have space or desire or budget for a video card. So if you can't afford a discrete card, or you don't have space for it, or you've got thermal or wattage issues, grab the 7850K. It performs pretty well. You will be stuck at low to medium settings on most games. It'll play things like Skyrim just fine on medium and high settings, but it will definitely struggle and be unplayable with some games like Assassin's Creed Unity or Far Cry 4. Just don't even really expect to play those games on a 7850K. You need a discrete GPU for that. Now, you could run the 7850K with a GPU, then you would be okay. But at that point, you might as well buy a better processor and get a GPU with it, because there's no reason to have the IGP in there if you're just offloading it all to a discrete graphics card, because dual graphics is really not what it needs to be right now to be worthwhile. Moving up to the high end, we've got Intel's Devil's Canyon processors. This is the 4690K, which is about $210 right now with the sales. Definitely worth it. It's a 4-core, 4-thread processor. It is not hyper-threaded, unlike the i7 counterpart, and it's fully unlocked for overclocking, so you can overclock the 4690K completely. You have very few restrictions. Do make sure you get the correct Z97 motherboard with it, though, because even within Z97 boards, some of them will be more limited than others for overclocking options, so that is something to note. It will run you a bit more, because not only is the processor more expensive, but the boards will be more expensive as well, because they need to sustain higher voltages and things like that and be more stable on the whole. The 4690K is clocked at 3.5 gigahertz natively, and it will overclock pretty easily. You can pretty much guarantee a 10 to 20% overclock depending on what kind of air cooler you're using. If you're on liquid, then it'll go a little higher. Don't expect too much. Intel really pushed Devil's Canyon as being sort of the end-all be-all overclocking solution after Haswell, but it's not quite there. It didn't do what everyone expected it to. So don't go into this expecting you'll be hitting 5 gigahertz on air, because you probably won't be, just realistically. Still a very good processor. It will play every game out there as long as you've got a good GPU with it on high, ultra, max settings. Really, I've run into no CPU throttling on this for the most part. If you're running a multi-monitor higher resolution setup, like a 4K setup, then you might run into CPU throttling depending on how many and how powerful GPUs you've got in your system. So that is something to note. In that case, you'd probably want to look a little higher end. But at that point, you're spending so much money on GPUs anyway that it makes sense you'd have a better processor. As for the rest of the high-end range, there's the i7 4790K, which is similar to the 4690K, except it's four cores, 8 threads, so it is hyper-threaded. Hyper-threading has very little impact on most modern games. Battlefield 4 will take more advantage of it because it's a very heavily multi-threaded application. Most games will not exceed 2 to 4 threads of efficient usage, so don't buy this thinking it's going to vastly improve your gaming experience for most games. It will vastly improve your experience for things like Adobe Premiere and Photoshop, which eat all of the threads that you make available to those applications. So that is where you would be buying a 4790K. It is priced at $300 with sales right now, which is pretty good. Hit the links in the description below for all the links to these products and things like that. At the high end, once you're spending $500, there's the X-class processors, the X99 in this instance, Haswell E. And those are really for enthusiasts. They're for production rigs that don't want Xeons for one reason or another. They're very good processors, but they're so expensive that it's tough to justify for the vast majority of gaming PCs, which we generally push toward the 4690K, or on the budget side, the 860K from AMD, or similar. Of course, there's the 4440 in the middle. But the 5930K processor is a 3.5 gigahertz 6-core CPU. It's insane, and the architecture is insane, and it uses quad-channel DDR4 memory. So it's vastly different from the rest of the CPUs we've spoken about, and for that reason, I'm going to cut the recommendation there short because it's so different. Do look into that if you're looking to spend more than $500. You're building some kind of high-end production or enthusiast rig. And then there are $1,000 CPU options as well if you'd prefer those. So that is all for this CPU buyer's guide. Hit the link in the description below for more information on these CPUs, for links to where you can buy them. And please subscribe. Please like the video. It helps us a lot in making more of these. And I will see you all next time. Peace.